author, columnist, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, talk show host, and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I am your host, Mark Angelides. On today's edition, we are discussing Zohran Mamdani, AOC, Chuck Schumer, Democrats writ large, and the impending 2026 midterms. It's quite the show, lots of information, lots of fun. I hope you enjoy it. Please do remember, Liberty Nation Radio is sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're joined by longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst to join the fun, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Thank you, Mark. Good to be here.
So, Tim, we've been watching news reports all week about how Mayor Eric Adams quitting the mayoral race coming this November is going to impact the actual outcome. Now, there's a lot of talk being offered on, the different electoral math, the different percentages which are going to go this way or going to go that way. But, Tim, does it really make any difference at all that Mayor Adams is no longer in the running?
Well, I think it's fair to say at the micro level, it does make some difference, but at the macro level, almost nothing. Eric Adams was in single digits. He was, his administration was rife with corruption. And he was seen by New Yorkers as having kind of cozied up to Donald Trump, got an indictment thrown out by the Trump administration. And, the fact is that, Eric Adams, I think, was very well-intentioned from the beginning. He had a background in law enforcement, and that's what people wanted. But he proved to be just kind of in over his head as mayor of New York. The best thing he did was appointing the police commissioner, a woman, Ms. Tisch, who has gotten very high marks from everybody and who even Zohran Mamdani says he will keep in her role as chief of police. But where does Adams' 8 or 9% go? It's probably split. Maybe 2% goes to Mamdani, 2 or 3% to Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, and maybe 2 or 3% to Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate who seems intent on running, even though he knows that his participation in the race all but guarantees the Democratic Socialist Mamdani a victory in November. Mamdani's lead has only been increasing incredibly since his primary victory. And now New Yorkers, Democrats are left with Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, who seems on his last legs. He's just not the figure that he was when he ran for governor and even when he was governor. So I don't see anything fundamentally changing in this race, absent the most unforeseen events possible. So no.
Yeah, those black swan events.
No change.
They do turn up, right? The October surprises. So there's I think was it Hemingway?
I think the problem is, Mark, that what is there left to surprise you about Mamdani? He's already revealed all of his far left views. He's already proclaimed himself a democratic socialist. He's already been attacked from every angle, and his lead just keeps growing.
Very much so. There's and regarding Andrew Cuomo, former governor, there's I think it was Hemingway who said there's no third act in American politics, and I was of a mind to agree with that, but then you see Donald Trump. I mean, he had his third act in a very real sense, right? He had his
third act stuff. It's another one of these things that's always true until it's not.
Yes, exactly.
And it brings to mind when Jimmy Carter was facing Gerald Ford in the presidency, and people said Ford would win because the shorter of the two men was never elected president, the shorter guy.
Yeah.
Well, that had been true up until 1976, but then Carter won, and so it's no longer a thing. So there are second and third acts in politics. I don't know that there's fourth acts, but Donald Trump certainly has been in on a third act, and it's his most compelling act of all.
Well, you'd kind of hope that, wouldn't you? You always hope that the third act is the most compelling because you want the buzz when people walk out of the theaters. I think sticking on this theme, I know it's slightly off topic, but I think the only person at least in my memory, who has achieved or is about to achieve a fourth act is Britain's Nigel Farage. He's, in terms of making political history in the United Kingdom, I can't think of anybody who's really gone from the laughing stock that he was. And there's a beautiful, he was actually, he did a speech at Hillsdale College a short while ago. And he was saying that when he was in the European Parliament, he got elected to the European Parliament, and he told everybody there, my job is to take Britain out of the European Union. And everybody laughed at him. And then the day after the Brexit vote, he went in and said, you're not laughing now, are you? And then this guy's retired from politics twice. He's led the UKIP party that he was deeply involved in to win national elections to the European Parliament twice. Then he did another party, the Brexit Party, and led them to win a national election for the European Parliament. He spearheaded the entire Brexit, then retired again, and then came back with to head up Reform again, the party he created. Then, after 7 attempts, became a member of Parliament. And now, from the latest polling, and now this is not just the regular polling that you get, 2,000 people. It's a new form of polling, or it's a newly accepted form of polling. And what it does, it goes to all the different areas, all the different constituencies, and it's like 13, 14, 15,000 people. And it looks like he's going to be, if the election were held today, and that there's always a caveat there, if the election were held today, he would be the leader of the largest party, maybe even close to a majority, from a laughing stock to prime minister. That I would say that's Nigel's fourth act. So yeah, as you say, Tim, but that whole point is to say, yes, you're right. Nothing's ever true. Nothing's ever wrong until it happens. So let's talk Curtis Sliwa. He's hoping to benefit from a couple of points from the Adams camp. But and you mentioned that with him still in the race, that really just hands it all to Zoran Mamdani.
Yes.
So do you think if everybody who was for Sliwa went for I'm sorry, I forgot, Governor Cuomo, former Governor Cuomo, do you think that would be enough to make a competitive race?
I do not.
Okay.
Because Curtis Lee was still a Republican.
Yeah.
And as we can see from the polling in New York, and this was quite significant, that many of the black voters who supported Cuomo during the primary are switching over to Mamdani because he's got a D next to his name.
Yeah.
If you have that Democratic label in New York, that's extremely valuable. And Sliwa being a Republican, yeah, we've had Republican mayors before,
sure,
but we don't have guys who are basically guardian angels who ride the subways and help secure public safety, which is a very admirable thing. But it certainly doesn't qualify Curtis Sliwa to be mayor of the most important city in the world. So, no, I don't think that would make the difference. If anything, it could possibly increase Mamdani's lead, but you never know. I mean, it could be that most of his votes go to Cuomo, and together with the votes that, could go to Mamdani from Adams dropping out, it would make it more interesting. It would make it more competitive. but I don't think it would change the ultimate winner in this race. I just don't see where Mamdani can be beaten right now.
Yeah, all the numbers seem to show exactly that, Tim. Now, we're going to be back with Tim Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation senior political analyst and long-time host of this here radio show, Tim Donner. Thanks for sticking around, Tim. So earlier in the show, we were talking how little, really, Eric Adams' withdrawal from the New York City mayoral race impacts Zohran Mamdani's chances of winning this November. But what I'd like to do is kind of expand that and talk about, or get your ideas at least, on how do you think a Zohran Mamdani win in New York is going to impact the Democratic Party's perception of the Democratic Party across the nation?
Well, I think Democratic leaders themselves are very sensitive to the branding of their party. I mean, there's no question about it, because you see pretty much all the major domos, other than New York Governor Kathy Hochul, shying away from endorsing Mamdani. We get things from Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader, and Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, saying, we're continuing our conversations with Zohran Mamdani, which means we're trying to find some way to both be loyal to a Democratic nominee and yet not brand the party as far-left socialist. And so it's a very tricky kind of conundrum for Democrats. And a lot of it is because this is a year where there's only 3 races of any national significance: the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, and the New York City mayoral race. And so all the attention is focused on New York. So when Mamdani wins, which seems, I'm not going to say certain, but seems highly likely at this point, now the Democrats will be left with the branding of having doubled down on their progressive bent over the last 4 years. Rather than turning to the center, the party will be seen as doubling down and tacking even further left by having a self-proclaimed democratic socialist as the most high-profile winner this year. Now, we saw what the party did when they were afraid that Bernie Sanders could become the standard bearer for the party as a presidential nominee in both 2016 and 2020. And they ran him out of the race, essentially by basically telling all the other so-called moderate Democrats to get lost and leave Joe Biden in as the only alternative in 2020, just like they did with Hillary Clinton in 2016. So
that was very democratic of them, by the way, don't you think?
Well, not to mention that their nominee this year was someone who never received a single vote for president after running twice well, she didn't really run in 2024 for the nomination, but she received no support and likely would not have received the nomination if there was an open primary process. And in 2016, they did everything they could to make sure it would be Hillary Clinton and not Bernie Sanders. So that tells you what they feel about the label of socialist in the Democratic Party. They have to be very careful with that. But at this point, it's out of their control. I mean, New York City is its own universe. It's far to the left of mainstream America. 92% roughly of New Yorkers identify as Democrats. So they've got themselves a serious problem on their hands. And so Kathy Hochul is a good example of what happens. Kathy Hochul, damned if she does, damned if she doesn't. She was damned by the likes of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the other progressives in the party for not endorsing Mamdani. And then when she finally did endorse Mamdani, she got attacked from the center by people who said, what are you doing supporting a socialist? So you see what the problem is, and it's not going to go away. After the November elections, assuming Mamdani wins, all the reporting, the stories, the narrative is going to be the Democratic Party has moved even further left than they were under Joe Biden.
Yeah, I like how you discuss this as a branding problem, because after 2024, Donald Trump won 2024 because a lot of America thought that the party's going too far left with Joe Biden, with Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris is pretty far left. Joe Biden's fairly centrist. I mean, sure, he was
centrist, and then he was held captive by his progressive wing. Yeah.
So you've got this large chunk of America saying that's just too far left. We need, they would be saying we need somebody Bill Clinton-esque. Who, by the way, if you go back and you watch some of Bill Clinton's things, some of his speeches, his proclamations, and you look at him, you think this guy's MAGA. This guy's MAGA in the 1990s. It's really, there's not a lot of difference between when it comes down to policy. But see, you've got this big chunk of America saying this has just gone too far left, and then Zoran Mamdani presumably wins, and as you say, it's the most important city in the world in so many ways, and it's under the control of somebody who is so far left that it's going to taint the rest of the party going into not just the 2026 midterms, but 2028 and even beyond. And I really think that, good luck to Mr. Mamdani. I hope he does great for New York City. But I think his association with the Democratic Socialists, what is actually the groups that he works with, that he is part of, and the things that they put out. And you did a great article on this, Tim, on the pages of LibertyNation.com, talking about how it is the destruction of the nuclear family in so many ways. And that just doesn't seem to me to be what America has an appetite for.
Well, Mark, you're talking about the Democratic Socialists of America, which is a party that Zoran Mamdani proudly has belonged to for about 8 or 9 years. And part and parcel of their platform is to basically destroy the nuclear family unit. They've said things like the only difference between a family and prostitution is what price you have to pay. These are the kind of statements that really repel normal Americans. And I think that, Andrew Cuomo will try to use this stuff down the stretch. I don't think it will be successful. But the difference, you brought up Bill Clinton, and you know what? The fundamental difference between Bill Clinton and Joe Biden is that Clinton had really sharp political instincts. He knew where things were headed, and he brought his party, he tacked them to the middle. And I hate to use a well-worn expression, but Zoran Mamdani represents the Democrats' chickens coming home to roost.
Indeed. We're going to be back with Tim Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our long conversation with former host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation senior political analyst, Tim Donner. Thanks for sticking around, Tim. We cannot escape discussion of what's happening in New York City, what's happening with Democrats across the country, unless we talk about the donkey in the room. And that is, I know by donkey here, I mean Democrat, of course.
Yeah.
Rather than the individual we're about to mention. And that is, there's so much chatter going on, and it's a low buzz. But it's there, and it's prevalent in many, many areas. And that is Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and a potential run for the president of the United States. What's your thoughts on that, Tim?
I don't think that even she has a swelled head big enough to believe she can go from being a bartender to president of the United States in 10 years.
I don't know. Hey, Tim, I've got to interrupt you on that. I happen to know that our current president was, serving out McDonald's fries not 1 year ago.
Okay, I stand corrected, Mark. Sorry. Okay. I do think, though, that it's realistic for her to believe that she could beat Chuck Schumer in the Senate Democratic primary in New York in 2026, because Schumer, ever since he so-called sided with Trump, which isn't what he did, he had two horrible options, and he picked the least bad of them when he decided to avoid a government shutdown months ago. And that made him an extremely unpopular figure, even though he really was left with little choice but to do that or shut down the government, which is, of course, an issue that's come back to the fore again here in late September, early October. So AOC is a rising star. She's charismatic. She speaks well. She is very good at demagoguery. And she inspires Democrats who are just tired of the old guard of Schumer and Biden and, Elizabeth Warren and all these Democrats who have failed essentially over the years to consolidate enough support to get the Democrats back into the White House or even to win it back in 2016. They barely avoided, a loss in 2020. And I think the old guard is headed on its way out. And for the Democratic Party, the young blood is a good thing. But the problem is that all of the young blood is even further to the left than Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden in his heart of hearts. So, yes, more energy, more youth with AOC and the squad, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and the rest. They're outspoken. They have guts, so to speak, in speaking out in the starkest terms.
Yeah.
But what happens when they actually win? I think definitely Chuck Schumer is very worried about a challenge from AOC. And I think what we're going to see happen is Schumer start to sound more militant over the course of the next year so that he can tack to the left and attract enough votes to hold off Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If I was betting at this point, though, Mark, I would put my money on AOC for that New York Senate seat because Chuck Schumer strikes me as an anachronism whose time has come and gone, if it ever, in fact, even came. He was never particularly effective, and he's not popular with his base, and he doesn't present well to the public. He has very low public approval. So
yes.
AOC presidency, not yet, at least.
Yeah.
Senate, definitely.
I like what you said there about Chuck Schumer's lack of appeal, because it really, it's so strange. Like, he puts out those pictures around Thanksgiving and there's raw burgers with cheese on them. It shows him to be, I don't know, just so oddball different to the rest of the human race. In the same way that Elizabeth Warren, when she was opening a beer, trying to appear homely, and look, I drink a beer. It's like she'd never seen a bottle of beer in her life. And it's like Chuck Schumer had never been to a barbecue in his life. And it's a lack of authenticity.
Right.
Because
we saw that with Kamala Harris, too.
Yes.
Where
she very much so.
She went on it was a Jimmy Kimmel show, and he offered her a beer. And she said, yeah, the last time I had one of these was when me and Doug went to a ball game, which you just knew was not true.
Why would you say that?
Like something rehearsed to make her seem like an everyday person.
what's amazing is that nobody in the history of the human race, unless they're they're lying to their support group, their AA support group. Oh yeah, the last time I had one of these was
Right.
13 months
That's
ago.
right.
Can I have my
Yes.
token, please? It's
Yeah.
it's so strange. But back to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I think you're right that she would definitely garner more appeal, especially among, because New York's quite a young city in many ways. The voting population's young. I think Chuck Schumer has been so secure because nobody's really ran against him with a competitive primary before.
True.
But in terms of AOC's forward momentum, I wonder if she will not be held back by her association with the squad. Because we talked about it earlier in the show, and the majority of America, and I'm not just talking the majority that Donald Trump won, but I'm talking the majority across, both and all parties, are not that far left, and yet you have the squad members seemingly competing to be the most far left or the most radical or the most identity politics driven character within Congress. And if you wanted somebody who's super far left, if the party wanted somebody who's super far left, Bernie Sanders would have won in 2016 or 2020.
Yes.
But the party doesn't want it. The public doesn't want it. And I wonder if her continued connection as part of the squad, which of course it's the Justice Democrats, I believe Cenk Uygur had quite a lot to do with setting that up and drawing in funding for that. Her continued association with that labels her with the same brush, or tars her with the same brush that a lot of Americans see when Ilhan Omar says some people did something to describe 9/11, or any number of, let's be clear, quite offensive comments to a large section of society and not just Republicans. I think she might find them an anchor around her neck, or an albatross even.
Well, I think with her pretty strong political instincts, my sense is that over the next year, AOC is going to distance herself,
although we shouldn't.
Herself. Yeah, unless she goes transgender, which is always possible.
There's an extra few hundred votes there for her.
She said probably so, but I suspect AOC is going to try and further distance herself from the squad over the next year to try to present as a more serious political figure rather than a gadfly. She's the only one on the squad that presents well to the general public in terms of her, the way she speaks, the way she rallies people. You look at Rashida Tlaib and you look at Ayanna Presley, and you look at Cori Bush and the rest of these squad members, and they are absolute left-wing bomb throwers who have no charisma at all, but have, the Ilhan Omars of the world continue to take up the far left flank of the party. And I think AOC is smart enough politically to know that that's not where she wants to be anchored. I think she's going to try to present as quite a bit more mainstream over the next year. She'll pick and choose a few issues where she can try to sound reasonable and non-threatening to the more centrist elements of her party and the electorate writ large. I suspect that's where she's going to go. You don't see her appearing, by the way, with Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and Ayanna Presley, the other radicals. You don't see her appearing with them anymore. So clearly, she's trying to make a break and establish her own individual presence and identity and the narrative of her campaign. And heck, she went from a bartender to Congress. What's to say she can't go from Congress to the Senate when she's running against a guy who seems like he has, let's say, seen better days in Chuck Schumer?
It's all about the narrative, Tim. You're absolutely right. We're going to be back with Tim after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back for our final segment on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain Mark Angelides. Tim Donner remains, as always, Tim Donner. And we can't escape this episode, Tim, without discussing the 2026 midterms, which, as I know, for you and I, it's already an obsession this far out. But as soon as we get past the winter period, the old Christmas time and whatnot, it's going to be everybody's obsession. So let's take the far out view. And of course, a lot can change here. But what do you think of the big races to watch, B, the trends that we should be considering?
Well, I think it's going to be a bridge too far for the Democrats to try and overcome a 6-seat deficit in the upper chamber, although it's really a 3-seat deficit. It's 53-47. It seems unlikely that they could take control of the Senate. They have to win 4 seats that they currently don't hold. And even though they have a much better hand to play because the Republicans are defending about 2/3 of the seats that are up, I think it looks highly unlikely that the Democrats could take control of the Senate no matter what happens between now and next year, unless we hit literally a deep recession or a depression and people want to sort of kick the Republican bums out. Now, as far as the House goes, it certainly helps that the state of Texas flipped the rules so that they're probably going to get 5 more races that they could win, which would bring them up to about 225 in a vacuum instead of 220. Right now, they're at about 220 to 212, which is really more like 220 to 214 because there's 2 vacant seats from deaths in the Democratic Party that are likely to be filled by other Democrats. But, we've talked about it before. The midterms are grievance elections in general, grievance about the Dobbs decision in 2022, grievance about the economy or whatever in midterm elections going all the way back in time. So they have that built-in advantage. But at the same time, the Democrats, just keep pumping out the bad news. Self-inflicted wounds where I don't see where the Democrats have had any kind of a major victory since Trump became president. They haven't won on a single point. They haven't been able to successfully force Trump to reverse any of his policies. They haven't stopped Speaker of the House Mike Johnson from consolidating in a very impressive way, I might add, Republicans to join forces, because we know there's a lot of Republicans.
Oh, yeah, there's factions and factions.
Gadflies, yes. Yeah. So I think if there was a year where the Republicans stood a decent shot to maintain their congressional majorities, it would probably be 2026, looking at it more than a year out, because the sense is that the economy is probably going to get better. The tariffs are going to bring in more income, the high profile. I don't know about the whole issue of deportations because people voted for it, and yet they don't have the stomach for a lot of the things that Trump is doing. It reminds me of the movie A Few Good Men, where Jack Nicholson says famously, "You can't handle the truth." He goes on to say, "You expect me and you put me on watch to keep you safe, and then you object to the means I use to do it." Yeah. And that's what Americans right now are in the throes of. They can't stomach the ICE raids and stuff like that, even though they had to know that this is what it would take to reverse the millions of people who are allowed to cross the border illegally. So it's policy-wise, the Republicans are in good shape, but the Democrats are so bitterly opposed to Trump and everything that he's done that they're likely to turn out in huge numbers.
So I see your point about with Texas adding that 5. It really creates a little cushion.
Well, the Democrats have they've simply done nothing to suggest that they have learned from 2024 and are seeking someone like Bill Clinton to bring them towards the center. If anything, it showed they're going to go even further left, and that is not appealing to the broad mass of American voters.
It's not where elections are won. I'm reminded of Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who had his Labour Party conference, which is the time to launch his third reset button. Hit his third reset button in 14 months, which is a few too many. And he's now rated as the least popular prime minister that the country's ever had. But he was fast on the heels of the Reform Party under Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage announced the new policy, which obviously can't be implemented because he's not in power. He's not the prime minister. But he says, when I am prime minister, if I'm fortunate enough to become, he says, what we're going to do is we're going to reverse what's happened with indefinite leave to remain, which is the system by which people come to the country. Then after they've been in the country for a certain time, they're allowed to stay for as long as they want. And he came out and he put this out, and then the media spent 2 weeks attacking it as it's the worst thing ever. The Labour Party, on one day, I think it was a Sunday, was saying, well, it's clearly a racist policy by a racist party. And then on Monday, they announced a new policy that is almost word for word, just like the one that Nigel Farage had floated and says, yes, but ours isn't racist. And that reminds me, because you've got the...
yes, it's driven by different emotional forces. Right.
So it reminds me of what's happening. We talked about how they don't have their jobs this year, and they may have inflation if inflation takes off, but it's signally failed to so far. They might have a recession or a depression, although it doesn't really look like it at time of recording. And so what have they got? Well, they've essentially got to lean into the policies that are working, or appear to be working, we should say, for Donald Trump at the moment, and then present them as, we're going to do the same. We're going to control immigration, but we're going to do it in a non-racist way. And that's really all they've got to lean into for the elections until they come out with, as you say, either a Bill Clinton-esque type figure that they can rally around who'll push them back to the center, or they jettison some of the far left, which is not likely to happen when Zohran Mamdani's almost certainly just won the New York City mayoral election. So what do they have other than recraft policies that they know are popular because Donald Trump won an election on them, but with a Democrat branding, a Democrat spin, which might end up being as unfortunately simple and dull and tepid as, but it's not racist.
Well, the problem the Democrats have above all else is that they are absolutely leaderless.
Yes.
So they have no one to lead the parade. Republicans, on the other hand, are all in on Trump. Trump is leading the parade. Trump is large, in charge. It's his policies are the highway for Republicans. So there's clear leadership, whether you like it or not, in the Republican Party. The Democratic Party is all over the map. There are some Democrats who are complaining they're too far left, others who are saying they're not far left enough. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, who else? Elizabeth Warren. These people are not leading any kind of parade. They have no leadership, so they're sort of all out there on their own as individuals, and that's no way to win midterm elections.
Tim Donner, thanks ever so much for being with us today. Really appreciate it. And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. Our special guest today has been Tim Donner, longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please do check out what we've got on the pages of libertynation.com for further analysis, polling, and just a whole deal of great fun over there. Who said the news has to be dull? Please do remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse campaigns, candidates, or legislation, and this presentation has been no endorsement. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.